The medication cost $11.90. I remember the 90 cents because the pharmacist said it twice, first when the machine beeped and rejected my card, and again when I asked her to run it a second time, as if repetition might change what the screen was telling us. $11.90. Less than the tank of gas my son had put in his truck that morning, less than the tip he'd left at the steakhouse the week before, if the receipt Margaret found in his jacket pocket was anything to go by. If the amount had been $400, or even $150, maybe I could have understood the hesitation in his voice. But $11.90 was nothing. It was less than nothing, and that was exactly what made it impossible to explain away. Margaret stood beside me at the pharmacy counter, one hand resting on the handle of her cane, though she only needed it on days when the cold got into her hip, the way it had that morning. The white paper bag holding her blood pressure medication sat on the counter between us, a small, waxy rectangle that had become, over the past 6 years, as unremarkable to our lives as the coffee maker or the porch light. She'd been on it since the year our grandson was born. It kept her numbers where the doctor wanted them and let us live most days without thinking about her heart at all. "Would you like to try another card, mister?" "Hail," the pharmacist asked. Her name was Denise. We'd known her since she was a pharmacy tech working weekends to pay for her degree, and there was a kindness in the way she kept her voice low, giving me the dignity of pretending the man behind us in line couldn't hear every word. "There should be plenty in that account," I said. I ran the card again. The same small red message blinked on the screen. Declined. Margaret leaned in. Maybe the fraud block came back on. 3 months earlier, someone in another state had tried to charge $900 to a furniture store using our old debit card number. The bank canceled it, and our son Curtis offered to help set up the replacement. He changed the password on the account, added his own phone as the security contact, and told us it would make things easier if another strange charge ever came through. I'd resisted at first, but he reminded me how many hours I'd spent on hold with the bank's automated line the last time, and I was tired enough to let him do it. That was how these small surrenders happened. Nobody announced that you were giving up control. Someone you loved simply said, "Let me handle it," and you were worn down enough to say yes. I stepped away from the counter and called Curtis. It was 5:20 on a Wednesday. He picked up fast, but there was an edge in his voice before I'd even explained why I was calling. "Dad, I'm in the middle of something. Our card got declined. Your mother's medication is $11.90. Can you call the bank? Or give Denise your card number, and I'll pay you back tonight." In the background, I heard a copier running and a woman's voice, low and steady. I recognized it as his wife Renata's, though I couldn't make out the words. "No," Curtis said. I thought I'd misheard him. "No, you can't call the bank. No, I'm not putting another charge on my card. You two need to start living inside an actual budget." Margaret watched my face change. I turned slightly away from her. "It's $12, I said. "The money is already in our account. Just fix it tomorrow." She takes it with breakfast. Curtis let out a long breath, the kind meant to be heard. "If Mom misses one dose, maybe you'll finally understand why Renata keeps saying you two need help managing things." The sentence was so cold that for a few seconds I couldn't place it as coming from my own son's mouth. This was the boy who used to bring Margaret dandelions in a jelly jar, the man who slept upright in a hospital chair the night of her gallbladder surgery, and now he was talking about withholding her medicine like a missed dose was some kind of lesson we needed to learn. "Open the account," I said. "Not right now. We're in a meeting." "What meeting?" Renata asked somewhere near him. Curtis covered the phone, not all the way. I heard 4 words leak through. "Don't get into it." Then he came back. "I have to go. We'll talk Friday when we bring the paperwork over." The call ended. Denise was still waiting at the register. Margaret didn't ask what Curtis had said. After 46 years of marriage, she knew when I was choosing words that would hurt less. I opened my wallet. 2 tens, a 5, and 3 ones tucked behind my driver's license. Bills so old and soft in the folds, they felt like cloth. I paid the $11.90, took the change, and set the pharmacy bag in Margaret's hands. "We'll sort the account out tomorrow," I said. She looked at the bag, then at me. "He said no, didn't he?" I nodded. "For my medicine? I had the money." "That wasn't my question, Walter." The man behind us pretended not to listen. Denise busied herself with a label printer. Margaret had spent 26 years running the front office of an elementary school. She knew the difference between sparing someone embarrassment and hiding the truth from them. He said we need to learn to budget, I told her. I didn't repeat the part about missing a day. Not yet. She slid the bag into her purse. Her fingers were steady. We've been budgeting since before that boy had teeth. We drove home without talking, rain streaking sideways across a county highway that had gone the color of dishwater in the last light. Our house sat on an acre and a half outside Millbrook, a low brick ranch with a maple tree Curtis had helped plant the spring. He started kindergarten. We'd bought the place in 1988 for $71,000. I'd redone the roof twice, rebuilt the back porch after the derecho, rewired the garage myself, and added a room the year my mother came to live with us at the end of her life. The mortgage had been paid off for 9 years. We had a modest pension, a little in savings, a little more in the retirement account. We weren't wealthy, but we had never once worried about affording medicine. When we got inside, I opened the laptop on the kitchen table and tried to log into the bank. The password Curtis had written down for me on a sticky note no longer worked. I clicked the reset link. A message appeared saying a security code had been sent to a phone number ending in 7,726. Curtis's number ended in 7,726. Margaret read the screen over my shoulder. When did that change? After the fraud charge. You mean, when he helped? The word helped came out of her mouth like something she was turning over to check for rot. I called the number on the back of our debit card. The representative asked 3 verification questions, put me on hold twice, and finally told me there had been a transfer out of the checking account that morning. She couldn't discuss the full details until I completed identity verification in a branch, but she gave me the balance that remained, $16.11. That can't be right, I said. My pension deposit cleared last week. I can see an authorized transfer linked through online banking, she said. If you didn't initiate it, please visit a branch as soon as you're able. I can freeze the debit card now. I told her yes. After I hung up, Margaret sat at the table and opened the small spiral notebook where she tracked her blood pressure readings every morning. She wrote the date. Beneath it, she wrote, "Card declined 5:20 p.m. Prescription $11.90. Called Curtis 522. Paid cash." "Why are you writing that down?" I asked. "Because when people start changing your passwords, you write down what happened." Margaret wrote everything down. Field trip payments, substitute schedules, skinned knees, angry parents, medication permission slips. Nothing left her school office without a date beside it. Curtis used to tease her for keeping calendars from a decade back. That night I was grateful she'd never learned to trust memory alone. On Thursday she asked, "What paperwork is he bringing Friday?" Renata had mentioned updating the emergency contacts the week before. Emergency contacts don't require 3 days of preparation. I told her the rest of what Curtis had said. She didn't cry. She looked at the amber bottle in front of her and slowly slid the receipt out of the bag. "He wanted me not to notice," she said. "He was frustrated. Frustration leads to careless things. This felt intentional. I wanted to defend him. That instinct had been trained into me across 39 years. When he forgot his homework, I drove it to school. When he wrecked his first car, I helped him buy another before the insurance check arrived. When he started his contracting business, I covered payroll twice. I used to tell myself I was teaching him that family doesn't let anyone fall. Maybe what I taught him was that I would always put my hands under whatever he dropped. I slept badly. At 8:30 the next morning, Margaret and I went to the bank with our identification, the declined card, and 4 months of statements I kept in the desk drawer, out of habit more than suspicion. The branch manager, a careful woman named Sylvia Onwuka, took us into a glass-walled office and pulled up the account. The pension deposit had arrived. So had Margaret's Social Security payment. Over the last 5 weeks, 3 online transfers totaling $21,300 had moved out of our checking account into something called Harborview Legacy Solutions. The largest transfer, $11,200, had gone through Wednesday morning. Curtis's phone had received the verification code. "Do you recognize Harborview?" Sylvia asked. Of course I did. Harborview Legacy Solutions belonged to Renata. The company helped older adults downsize into smaller homes. Her staff photographed furniture, arranged estate sales, hired movers, cleaned houses, and coordinated everything with real estate agents. When she started it 4 years earlier, the idea had seemed clever. Families were often overwhelmed when a parent needed to move. Renata was organized, persuasive, and good at handling grief. The first 2 years went well enough that she opened a second office near Danbury. Margaret and I had loaned Harborview $41,000 for that expansion. Renata's father, a widower named Harold Pruitt, had loaned more. We'd all signed promissory notes. Renata made payments for 14 months, then asked for a temporary pause because 2 large estate sales had fallen through. I agreed without telling Margaret how uneasy it made me. Family businesses hit rough seasons. I'd spent my working life managing a county road maintenance budget, and there were winters when half our equipment fund got deferred to the next fiscal year. I understood cash flow. I didn't understand why our personal checking account had suddenly become someone else's cash flow. I never authorized these transfers, I said. I asked Sylvia to print the transaction details. The authorization had gone through the access Curtis set up after the fraud incident. He was still listed as our agent under a durable power of attorney we'd signed 5 years earlier, when I had surgery to relieve pressure on a nerve in my back. The document let him pay bills and manage routine banking if either of us needed help. It did not, as far as I understood it, authorize him to lend our money to his wife's company. "Can you get it back?" Margaret asked. Sylvia chose her words carefully. "I can open an internal investigation and restrict digital access. Since an authorized representative initiated the transactions, recovery may require documentation showing he acted outside his authority. You should speak with the attorney who prepared the power of attorney." "He'd passed away 2 years ago," I said. "Then speak with another attorney." That day, we removed Curtis's phone from the account, changed every password, froze the linked transfer service, and opened a new joint checking account for future deposits. Sylvia asked if we wanted to report suspected financial exploitation of an elder. I said I needed to talk to my son first. Margaret said no. We needed the information first. Sylvia looked between us. "Mrs. Hale is right about the order." I felt embarrassed that a stranger had to tell me my wife was right. We left with a folder of statements and less certainty than we'd walked in with. Curtis called before we reached the car. "Did you lock me out of the account?" "No. Hello? Did you transfer $21,000 to Renata's company?" "It's a reserve account, Dad. The money's still for the family." "Whose family?" "Ours. All of us. Put it back. We'll explain Friday." That's exactly why we need a plan. You see one line on a statement and panic. Your mother's prescription got declined because you emptied the account. I didn't empty anything. I consolidated it. Put it back today. Renata's voice came through on speaker. "Walter, don't threaten him. We're trying to protect you both from decisions made under pressure." I hadn't put the call on speaker. Margaret could hear anyway. She took the phone from my hand. "Renata," she said, "if protecting me means I can't buy my own blood pressure medicine, I'd rather stay unprotected. Curtis told me there was cash at home. Then why did my son tell me to skip a day?" Silence. Curtis said, "Mom, that isn't what I meant. It's what you said." Margaret ended the call and handed the phone back. "Tomorrow at 10, she said. "They can explain it here, in our own kitchen, where I can ask what I want." That afternoon, Curtis sent a 6-paragraph email. He wrote that the transfers were a temporary administrative measure. He wrote that rising elder fraud made centralized financial management responsible. He mentioned our recent difficulty completing basic transactions and Margaret's inconsistent medication routine. The final line asked us not to make fear-based decisions before Friday's family planning meeting. Margaret printed the email and slid it behind the pharmacy receipt in a manila folder. "My medication routine isn't inconsistent," she said. "I've missed one evening dose in 6 years, and that was the week I was in the emergency room for my gallbladder. He knows that, so why is he writing otherwise?" I had no answer. Thursday passed with the strange quiet that follows a sound you can't identify. I checked the county property database to make sure our deed hadn't been altered. It hadn't. I called our financial advisor and added a verbal password to our investment accounts. Margaret called her doctor, confirmed her prescription history, and requested a copy of her chart. Neither of us told our granddaughter Bailey. She was 16, taking advanced placement classes, applying to a summer science program. I didn't want the fear of adult life to settle into her before she'd even met it. At 9 that Thursday night, headlights swept slow across the living room wall, paused near the mailbox, then moved on. I went out with a flashlight but found only wet pavement. Margaret told me to come back inside. Do you think that was Curtis? Maybe someone looking for an address. You've defended him 6 times since Tuesday. I'm trying not to accuse our son of something I can't prove, and I'm trying to understand why the proof keeps arriving anyway. We went to bed without settling the disagreement. At 17 minutes past 6 on Friday morning, someone knocked on our front door. Not the bell. 3 hard knocks. A pause. Then 2 more. I pulled on my robe and looked through the narrow window beside the door. Harold Pruitt stood on the porch in a tan raincoat, gray hair flattened by the weather, clutching a black binder against his chest with both arms. His car was parked crooked at the curb, like he'd pulled in too fast to bother straightening it. Harold was Renata's father. I'd known him 19 years, though we weren't friends in the way people sometimes assume 2 grandfathers ought to be. We were polite at birthdays. We stood together at Bailey's school concerts. Once we'd spent an entire afternoon assembling a swing set without agreeing on which page of instructions was upside down. Harold had spent his career in commercial lending at a regional bank before retiring. He believed paperwork kept emotion from steering expensive decisions. I believed well-maintained machines kept people from needing paperwork in the first place. We respected each other from a safe distance. When I opened the door, he didn't say good morning. "Is Curtis here?" he asked. "No." "Renata?" "No." He looked past me down the hallway. "Margaret's awake." "What's wrong?" Harold lifted the binder slightly. His hands were shaking. "Before you let either of them in this house at 10, he said, "you need to read page 14. Margaret appeared behind me in her robe. "What's on page 14? Harold's face contracted with something like shame. "A record of your missed blood pressure medication." Margaret stepped closer. "I didn't miss it." "I know." "Then why is there a record?" Harold looked down at the binder. "Because the page was written Monday. The card got declined Wednesday." For a few seconds none of us moved. Rain drummed against the gutter above the porch. Somewhere down the road a truck downshifted. I opened the door wider. "Come in." Harold stepped inside but didn't take off his coat. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Curtis used to do his homework and Margaret used to fill out school calendars. Harold set the binder in the center. A white label on the cover read, "Pruitt Hale Asset Transition." Underneath, in smaller print, Phase 2 Implementation. "What was Phase 1? I asked. Harold rubbed both hands over his face, making us dependent enough to agree. He opened the binder. The first section held photographs of our house. Front exterior, back deck, kitchen, primary bedroom, garage. Each photo had been taken at angles meant to make the rooms look wide and empty, the way a real estate photographer would frame them. I recognized the style because I'd seen Harborview's listings online before. A typed note estimated our home's value at $409,000. Another estimated the cost of liquidating the contents, including my tools, Margaret's china, and the walnut dining set her father had built by hand. The second section covered Harold's townhouse. The third described 2 one-bedroom units at a place called Willowmere Senior Residences, 17 miles away. Neither Margaret nor I had ever visited Willowmere. Harold said he hadn't either. Then came the numbers. If both properties sold, Renata expected roughly $590,000 after mortgages, commissions, taxes, moving costs, and Harborview's fees. $160,000 would go into what the binder called a parent housing reserve. $290,000 would become a 5-year family bridge loan back to Harborview. The rest would cover transaction costs, business debts, and an emergency fund controlled by Curtis and Renata. They planned to keep nearly $280,000 off the 2 sales, I said. Harold shook his head. "Read the next page." The bridge loan had no collateral. Payments wouldn't begin for 18 months, and Harborview could extend the term if repayment threatened the business. The interest rate was 1.5%. Renata's company would also collect a 9% transition fee for selling our belongings and coordinating the move. "They're planning to charge us for taking our own things," Margaret said. Harold stared at the table. "How much does Harborview owe?" I asked. $304,000, as far as I know. A private lender has a balloon payment due at the end of the month. There might be more. And you knew? I knew the business was struggling. I only learned about your accounts Wednesday. I didn't know this plan was this far along. I turned pages. There were calendars for appraisals, estate sale prep, and moving dates. Our house was scheduled to be photographed the following Tuesday. An unsigned listing agreement named a real estate agent who worked with Harborview often. A deposit receipt showed Renata had reserved our unit at Willowmere with money transferred from Harborview. Then I reached a section titled Family Functional Observations. The language was polished, cold, and cruel. Walter resists assistance with online banking despite documented confusion following fraudulent activity. Margaret shows inconsistent medication adherence and depends on Walter for transportation and pharmacy access. Both minimize physical limitations and demonstrate emotional attachment to property disproportionate to practical need. Subjects, Margaret said. We became subjects. Page 14 was a daily log. Monday's entry read, Pharmacy access to be consolidated under family administration. Anticipated prescription interruption will demonstrate need for supervised payment process. Document response and offer Friday planning meeting as resolution. Tuesday's entry had been filled in, though Harold said the PDF's creation date showed it had existed before Wednesday afternoon. It read, Card declined. Margaret unable to obtain medication without Walter seeking emergency assistance from Curtis. Walter became agitated and rejected budgeting guidance. That's a lie, I said. I paid in cash. They didn't know that when the file was saved, Harold said. Margaret read the line again. Her expression shifted, not confusion now, but recognition. Curtis asked if we had cash in the house. I remember Renata saying the same thing on the phone. We had cash, so there was no real problem. That's how they explained it to themselves. They didn't need her to actually go without medicine. They needed the card to fail, the phone call to happen, and the request for help to exist on paper. The incident wasn't neglect in their records. It was data. How did you get this? I asked. Harold turned to the final section. Renata had asked him to notarize a family support acknowledgement. She'd sent what she said was a 6-page signature packet to his old office email because his home printer wasn't reliable. She'd sent the entire binder instead. He'd opened it Wednesday night. At first, he thought the care notes came from a consultant. Then he saw his own house on the map and found a notarized authorization bearing his stamp. Harold kept a meticulous notary journal. The document was dated 8 days earlier, the date he'd actually performed a notarization, but not for this. Is the stamp forged? I asked. It's an image of my stamp. The signature is mine, but it was copied from a different form. Your daughter did this? My daughter's company prepared the packet. He wouldn't put Renata's name in the same sentence as forged. Not yet. Margaret folded her hands on the table. What did you agree to, Harold? He looked at her, and for the first time since walking in, he stopped sounding like a retired banker. Too much, he said. Last summer, Renata told me she wanted to combine our housing plans. She said widowers decline faster living alone. She showed me Willowmere and said I could live near the two of you. I signed an authorization for an appraisal and let Harborview make repairs before listing my townhouse. I also loaned the business $94,000 2 years ago. Did she pay you back? No. Why didn't you tell us? Because I thought if your loan was being repaid, mine would be next. Then she told me you'd decided to invest more. I wanted to believe her. He'd learned about the transfer from our account because a spreadsheet in the binder listed $21,300 as the initial Hale contribution. Wednesday morning, he'd asked Renata about it. She said we'd approved the money but were becoming forgetful about decisions. When he demanded to see our signatures, she showed him the old power of attorney and said Curtis had authority. I let her explain it, Harold said. That's the part I'm ashamed of. I let her explain away every warning sign until it seemed small enough to ignore. What changed? Margaret asked. He pointed at page 14. Medication. My wife took blood pressure medicine before she passed. Renata used to drive across town if Ruth forgot her evening pill. Whatever trouble the business is in, I couldn't call this financial planning once I read that page. Harold called Renata Thursday morning and told her he wouldn't notarize anything else. She said he was confused and should rest. That night, Curtis drove to his house. He tried to talk you out of coming here, I said. It wasn't a question. He tried to talk me out of a lot of things, Harold said. I told him I was bringing the binder whether he liked it or not. I told him your mother's medicine wasn't a data point. At 10 that morning, Curtis and Renata arrived carrying a slim leather folder of their own, the kind meant for a bank meeting rather than a family breakfast. I met them at the door. Renata smiled first, the practiced kind she probably used with grieving families deciding what to do with a parent's furniture. We're glad you're both willing to talk this through calmly, she said. I stepped aside and let them into the kitchen, where Harold was already seated, the black binder closed in front of him. Curtis stopped walking when he saw his father-in-law at our table. Harold, I didn't realize you'd be here. And I imagine you didn't, Harold said. Renata's smile didn't waver, but something behind her eyes recalculated. This is a family conversation, she said. Harold, I appreciate you caring, but this concerns Walter and Margaret's long-term planning. Not what, Renata? Margaret said. Not the man whose townhouse is listed on page 9? Sit down, both of you. They sat. I placed my hand flat on the binder without opening it, because I wanted to watch their faces before the pages did the talking. 11 days ago, I said, someone decided my wife's blood pressure medicine would fail to fill on a Wednesday. Someone wrote that down on a Monday. Curtis's jaw tightened. That's not what happened. Then explain the date on the file, Harold said, and slid the binder toward him. Curtis didn't open it. He didn't need to. I watched the color leave his face the way it had when he was 9 years old, and I'd found the broken porch window he'd sworn he knew nothing about. We were trying to build a case for a plan that would actually help you, Renata said, her voice smooth and quick, the tone of someone used to steering a room. You two are proud. You'd never agree to downsize on your own. Sometimes families have to show, not just tell. Show us going without medicine, Margaret said. That was never going to happen, Renata said. Walter had cash. You didn't know that when you wrote it, I said. You needed the failure, not the fix. Curtis finally spoke. Quiet now, the anger gone out of him. I told her it felt wrong, writing it down before it happened. Renata turned to him, sharp. Curtis. No, he said. I signed off on this because you said it was the only way to get them to listen. I told myself we were protecting them. I didn't let myself think about what it would look like on paper. It looks like we wanted them to fail. You did want that, Harold said. I read the same file you did. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Rain had started again outside, tapping the kitchen window the way it had on the Wednesday this all began. What happens now? Renata said, and for the first time the smoothness cracked into something closer to fear. Is that you'll ruin the business over a misunderstanding, and none of us gets our money back. Not you, not Harold, not the loan you gave us. That threat, Margaret said, is exactly why we're not asking. We're telling. The power of attorney is being revoked today. We're speaking with an elder law attorney Monday, and whatever this company owes Harold, it will answer to him the same way it will answer to us. Curtis looked at his father-in-law for a long moment. I'm sorry, Harold. I let this go too far because I was trying to keep the business afloat, and told myself that was the same as taking care of everyone. Harold nodded once. He didn't offer forgiveness, and Curtis didn't ask for it directly. Some conversations only earn a nod. They left without the leather folder ever being opened. I never learned what was in it, and I never asked. The following months were unglamorous. We hired an elder law attorney named Priya Anand, who helped us revoke the power of attorney, freeze what remained of the transfers, and file a report with the state's Adult Protective Services Division alongside the bank's fraud unit. Harborview's collapse, when it came, wasn't dramatic. No handcuffs, no headline, just a quiet unwinding, a forced dissolution, a settlement that returned roughly 40 cents on the dollar of what we and Harold had loaned, spread out over 3 years. Renata kept her real estate license but not her company. Curtis kept his marriage, though for a long stretch it didn't look like it would survive the strain of what came out in the process: depositions, financial disclosures, a mediator's office where old grievances got itemized like line items on an invoice. He didn't come to the house for 4 months. When he finally called, it wasn't to apologize in the way I'd imagined apologies working. All at once, tearful, resolved. He asked if he could come by to fix a loose board on the deck. I said yes. He arrived the next morning with his own tools and stood at the back door waiting to be invited in, rather than walking through the way he used to. That pause told me more than any speech could have. Margaret started keeping her medication log in a small blue folder now, not because she distrusts the world more than she used to, but because dignity is easier to hold on to when memory has a date beside it. Harold comes to dinner sometimes, though never at the same table as Curtis, without Margaret sitting between them, placing the serving dish down like a boundary line. 2 years on, the wound has scarred over rather than healed clean, which I've come to understand is the more honest outcome. At our 48th wedding anniversary, Margaret asked me to drive her back to that same pharmacy after dinner. Denise was working. Margaret handed over her prescription, and our card went through on the first try. "Anything else?" Denise asked. Margaret glanced at the display near the register and added a small bar of chocolate. Outside, we sat in the car while rain speckled the windshield, the same soft rain from that first Wednesday 2 years before. Margaret broke the chocolate in half and offered me a piece. "Do you ever wish Harold hadn't knocked on that door?" I asked. She thought about it. "I wish there'd been nothing for him to bring," she said. "That's different. Do you forgive Curtis enough to love him without ever handing him the password again?" I laughed. She smiled and leaned her head back against the seat. At 68, I finally understood something I should have learned much younger. Trust inside a family isn't proven by how much control you hand over. It's proven by what the people you love do once they're holding something fragile. Curtis had access to our money, our signatures, our routines, and our instinct to protect him. He used every one of them to delay a reckoning that belonged to him. Harold's knock didn't save us. Margaret's notes didn't save us. Sylvia, Priya, Denise, and the attorneys who followed didn't save us. Each of them held one piece, but the choice that changed everything was simpler than any of that. We stopped explaining away the first fact because we were afraid of the next one. The card was declined. Our son said no. The file had predicted both. Once we accepted those three truths, the rest was just work. Painful, expensive, ordinary work. Changing the passwords, revoking the document, keeping the receipt, asking the question, filing the report, telling the truth even when the person across from you shares your last name. That night, Margaret set the new prescription bottle in the kitchen cabinet. The blue folder stayed on a shelf nearby, not because we expect another fight, but because dignity is easier to hold on to when memory has a date beside it. The pharmacy receipt from that very first Wednesday still sits under a magnet on our refrigerator, the ink starting to fade. The lesson hasn't.